The purpose of this short video is to allow you to see the absolute power of Photoshop as a photo imaging tool and introduce you to a very simple yet powerful project called Little Planets. I use this project to engage all students. Students with lots of experience with Photoshop, but also students with very little experience of Photoshop. It's a great introduction to using filters. It also allows students to see that in possibly 3 to 4 steps they can produce some stunning images. I think this project can be demonstrated and then completed by students in about 45 minutes to 1 hour. It really is a very simple way to get students working and creating with Photoshop. So in this Photoshop tutorial that I call Little Planets, I'm going to show you how to make some incredible images in approximately 3 stages. We're going to learn how to resize and work proportions of an image. We're going to learn about rotating images. We're going to touch on using filters. And then we'll look at how we can enhance and tweak an image. So the first thing I'm going to suggest you do is a little bit of research with your students and get them to look up Little Planets. You could create a PowerPoint presentation or you could just flick through and show them. This is a tried and tested way of working and obviously produces some fantastic results. Now, I go straight in to creating a Photoshop image based upon some of my students. The rules of these images need to be experimented with to understand, but the first and foremost thing I'm going to say is with every image that I use adjust levels in order to get a decent black and a decent light, a decent light and a decent dark colour. The other important thing about Little Planet images is to have a horizontal line. Now I'm going to just click on View Rulers, and here you'll see that my centimetre rulers, and if I click inside the ruler and drag it down, I'm just going to check that my horizon line is actually pretty good. If it's not, I'm going to need to rotate it, which would be in image rotation, and of course I can do it 180 degrees, 90s, or arbitrary. And arbitrary will allow me to actually flick through 1 degree at a time or set the amount that I need to move or rotate the image. This one's fine, so I'm not going to. This blue line is just a guide, it's a ruler, so I'm going to pop that back up the top. So stage 1 is to create a evenly proportioned image. That means that the width and the height of the image are exactly the same. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the proportion, the width and the height of my image to be the same. Image size. I'm not going to work in pixels, I'm going to work in centimetres because I'm more familiar with centimetres. The problem I have immediately is that these are locked. This little link feature here means that my proportions are locked together, they're constrained. If I look down here nearly at the bottom of this panel, I can see that I've got the constrain proportions button checked. If I uncheck it, it means that I can now go in and change the width to be exactly the same as the height, which is 21.95. I'll click on OK. And immediately my picture looks a bit strange, but as I said, stick with it. The second stage is to flip the image upside down, and I can rotate this or invert it. So I'm going to go Image, Rotate, and I can flip it 180 degrees or I can flip it horizontally. Slightly different, but let's see what happens. It actually won't make any difference in this term, but it means that everything is now upside down. And the final stage to create my little planet is to try and use the filters. Now, one of the problems I have when I'm teaching with filters is that as soon as I introduce students to filters, they kind of go crazy. They love filters, but it's very difficult to control. So my approach to filters is to allow students to experiment with them, but really only use them when they can control them and understand them, and when they really need to. The filter I'm going to introduce you today is a distortion filter, and it's called polar coordinates. And for many years I've looked at polar coordinates and not really thought it's good for anything, but if I click on it, I now realise that it's an incredibly powerful tool. And if I just reduce the size, I can start to see that immediately I've made a planet. If the polar to rectangular rather than the rectangular to polar is checked, it will be a different image. Again, might be quite useful depending on what you're doing. But for what we're doing, we want the top option. So I click OK, and there we have it. It's as simple as that. That's 3 stages. That was image size, boom. It was image rotate, and then it was filter, distort, polar coordinates. So it's very, very simple. So the next stage of my little planet project is to ask my students to review and assess what they think of their work. And the immediate thought is that this is quite a good picture. It looks quite good, it's quite effective. But if I actually zoom in, I'll start to see where there might be some issues. So I might ask my students to review together in a peer review situation and looking for a constructive but critical discussion. I might do it as a group. The most important thing is that we can see where there are problems. We might be able to then think about how we might fix them, and immediately I can see 2. Number 1, I think, is that they are leaning on the edge of the planet, and I want them to be at the top. We'll look at that in a second. But I can also see here that I've got this problem where the image is wrapped around and it's actually not sitting very nicely together. So there's a very simple solution, I think, which is to take almost like a wedge or a slice of pizza, if you like, copy and paste it and put it over the top of here. I'm also looking at that. I've got some really blue sky on this side and some white on there, so I might look at doing a bit of blending shortly. So what I'm going to do is choose a lasso tool, and I'm going for the middle one, the polygon lasso tool, and I'm going to start right in the center of my image, and I'm going to click, and I'm going to choose this piece of house here because it's kind of ordinary. There's not a lot going on in it, and when I actually pick it up and place it over here, it should, if I'm lucky, cover my mistake. Now at the moment I've got 1 layer, and I'm going to try now to say edit copy and edit paste, which will give me a second layer, which will be my slice. And now I've got to move the slice into position. So if I make sure I'm clicked on the right layer and I go to my move tool because I want to move it, I'll notice that the pivot is right in the center, so I'm going to place the pivot right the way down in the bottom right hand corner. And that means when I go up outside the handle, I can actually shift it across. Now it's not going to be perfect, but it's a good start. I'm now going to shift. I'm looking at the rooftops and thinking, right, well, the roof works quite well. The problem I've got is that the grass just here doesn't, so I'm going to drag that down a little bit, and it is, whoops, I'm going to drag that down, and it is a case of just fiddling, whoa, backwards and forwards until I get this just right. Now, because the grass on the top layer now is sitting on the bottom layer, if I get an eraser tool, and I can make sure my eraser is nice and soft by sliding it to the left, click on the layer I want to erase, I can just nibble away at some of these edges where they're slightly sharp, where I've got these lines not really working out, and that will help me get the illusion of a seamless image. The second thing I want to look at is how I can move these guys around. Well, very simply, if I click on the tool at the top, so now I have a fixed image, and if I want to move them around, I'm going to just merge my layers. So I have 1 layer, which is simply layer merge down or flatten image, and that gives me 1 layer. I'm fixed. And if I click image rotate, and I'll go for arbitrary, I'm going to do it clockwise about 46 degrees, and that will start to rotate my image around, which is almost perfect. I might go a bit further, and actually that pretty much works. I'm just going to move this blue line out of the way so I can see the image, zoom in, and again we can hardly notice that little edit that we did earlier. The last stage on this project is to put the planet we've created, or the planets the students create, into a galaxy or a universe setting. So I'm going to flick across to Chrome, and I've just done a little search, a galaxy search. I made sure that it's a proper search, and that the people who took the pictures, I think it's NASA in this case, don't mind me using their images. So I'm going to quickly grab this image here. I'm going to grab the image and bring it into Photoshop. So the only problem I've got now is that I'm not actually in a galaxy setting. So I've got my image of a galaxy, I've got my image of my planet, and I want the two to combine. I'm going to show you probably the simplest method that I know, and I think it's always good to start simple, which is to put the images side by side. You can either edit, copy, edit, paste, or literally drag the image across. If the image in this case is way too big, I'm just going to go to the corner and make sure I'm holding Shift to sit in the middle of my universe. There's all kinds of things I can do to take away this white box, but I'm going to show you the simplest, which is to use the eraser tool to get a really nice big brush. Oh, that's probably too big. And literally just nibble away at the edges. And I'm going to try and leave a sort of glow, like a sort of interplanetary glow. I don't really know what that is. I'm sure there's somebody out there who'll be able to tell you, somebody in the science department who might say that there's some kind of genuine thing. And I'm just literally going to start clicking away because I think it actually looks quite nice that it's got this sort of haze coming off it. The very last bit on this, there you go, I think that looks lovely, is that if I wanted my people to be standing at the top of my planet, because it just looks a bit strange, if I go to my top layer and click on the move tool and go to just outside the handle, if I do want to shift them around, it's very, very easy now just to put them at the top. I can also resize by holding Shift again if I want to. And the very last touch that I thought might be fun would be just to see if I wanted to change the actual color of layer 1, give it some kind of Martian or alien feel. I might go to Image, Adjust, Hue and Saturation, and I might just move the hue of the color slightly to start to see what happens if I go for orange glass. Of course it shifts all the colors. I could select things out, but it starts to look quite fun. And there you go, that's it. So at the start I said there were 2 stages to this project, and the second stage is really a far more complex set of images and far more experimental. But you've seen how easy it is to get started, and if you look at this image here you can see that it's not just buildings that work. This is set in a woodland, and of course it's fantastic, beautiful image. But we might also look at how we can use the sky, how we can start to add characters. So if we think about taking an image, cutting out around it, and then adding that image back in. If I zoom in, you'll see that this is a really very, very well structured student piece of work. And again, the same thing you'll see here if we look at the cutout. Quite a lot of fun for students to play around. Some of the games that I play with them when we're thinking about, who do you want on your planet? And if I just show you, if I just click off this layer, you can see that by obviously shooting in front of something like a green screen or maybe a white wall, it's very easy to start to cut out, so that when you apply it to your planet, and then of course you can add special features in like this shadow, which again I think is just a cutout. But really beautiful imagery, a lot of fun. The games I was saying that we play with the students are, which friends, who do you want on your planet? Create your own little planet. And of course you can have a lot of fun with your students that way. So in this Photoshop tutorial, you've learned how to make little planets in 3 simple stages. You learned a little bit about how to resize images and how to reproportion images to make them square. We've learned how to rotate images 180 degrees, but also to use the arbitrary rotation tool, which allows you to rotate an amount of your choice. We've looked at applying simple filters. The filter we concentrated on was polar coordinates, but we've also looked at how we might tweak and enhance an image. We discussed a little bit about assessment and how we might ask students questions and they might respond and look at how they might improve their image, be self-critical or work together. But mainly we've looked at a project that is both engaging and fun and a really good way in to starting Photoshop with a group of students.